Each year, the fun and the pleasure of many people's outside activities around the lawn, the garden area, and picnicking for that matter, may be interrupted by contact with some of the poisonous plants we have in Oklahoma. And if you've ever experienced poison ivy or poison oak or the rash associated with this, you know it's no fun. In fact, we find that more than 2 million cases of poison ivy are reported each year to doctors and to hospitals for treatment. Poison ivy and poison oak are the #1 cause for workmen's compensation claims in the United States. So that makes it a very, very important pest for us, and recognizing this pest or these weeds and then employing the proper methods of control may avoid some of these unpleasantries associated with it. So let's spend a few minutes today on Oklahoma gardening looking at specifically poison ivy, how to identify it, how to control it, and maybe how to recognize some of the other plants that are commonly confused with poison ivy. There are a number of ways that we can identify poison ivy, one of those being, of course, because of the growth habit and the shape of the leaves. Now, poison ivy, of which there are at least 2 species common to Oklahoma, and poison oak, of which there are also 2 species common to Oklahoma, range throughout the entire state. We find that poison sumac might not be quite as prevalent, but nonetheless it is present here in Oklahoma. If we're looking at poison ivy or doing anything associated with poison ivy, the first thing I think we need to keep in mind is that we need some sort of protective clothing on. Now, many people find that they may not be sensitive to poison ivy or poison oak. In fact, I'm one of the fortunate few, I guess, that have never really experienced an outbreak of rash because of poison ivy. But I also know that this doesn't necessarily mean I'm immune to it, and any time I could come down with a very severe rash. So I like to put on long sleeve shirt, gloves, and other types of protective clothing if necessary if I'm going to be messing around the pest. Well, let's take a look at some poison ivy here and look at some of the identifying characteristics. First of all, we may find that poison ivy grows as a small plant, such as we're looking at here. But given time, we may also find that it grows up a tree or up a fence or some other method of attaching itself so that it does climb very much like a vine. If it's growing out in the open in full sunlight, it may turn into a short, stubby bush or have a brushy-like appearance, but still there are some identifying characteristics. For example, one of the things that we commonly associate or that we commonly identify poison ivy by is the leaf shape and the leaf arrangement. The leaf arrangement on poison ivy is what we call alternate, in that the leaves alternate up and down the stem. The leaves are really leaflets composed of 3 leaflets. And there is an old saying that says, "Leaflets of 3, let me be." And that certainly holds true with poison ivy. Now, with poison ivy, there are some means of control, but there are also some other plants that we confuse oftentimes with poison ivy. One of these is Virginia creeper. We may look at a distinct difference between poison ivy and Virginia creeper. For example, as we mentioned, poison ivy does have the 3 leaflets. Virginia creeper, which also is a creeping vine and a climbing vine, though has a very different leaf arrangement. As you can see, it has about a 5-lobed leaf, so it has a very distinct difference in the leaf than does the poison ivy. Now, if there is poison ivy on your place, around your lawn, around your garden, or somewhere where you're going to be conducting some of your outdoor activities, you certainly should attempt to get rid of it. One of the things you can do is simply to pull the poison ivy. If you have on gloves and protective clothing, then just pull the little plants up. You may break the roots off, in which case if you do, it's probably going to regrow, so you'll have to come in later and pull those again. These should then be placed in a bag, tied tightly and destroyed either through the trash or somehow to get rid of them. Do not burn poison ivy. Do not put poison ivy in the compost pile, because the sap from the leaves can escape either in the smoke or get out of the leaf some way and can cause injury many, many times on down the road. In fact, we have found that in some herbarium cards that are as much as 100 years old, poison ivy still can be toxic to people who are very sensitive to it. Another means of control of poison ivy is, of course, through chemical means. One of the chemicals that is available for control of poison ivy is amitrol. Amitrol does a very effective job, but it is a non-selective herbicide, so that means that you must be very careful to get it only on the plant that you want to control. If you're close to a garden area or to some desirable shrubs and trees, be very careful about the way you apply Almatrol. Another chemical that's very, very effective on poison ivy is Roundup. In fact, Roundup is one of the more effective chemicals, and we're finding that Roundup is being used more and more for poison ivy control. But like Almatrol, Roundup must also be handled very carefully in that it is a non-selective herbicide, so it will control the other desirable plants around. So when applying a chemical for control of poison ivy, a couple of things that we want to keep in mind is, first of all, be sure that you know that this is the plant you want to control. Choose the right chemical. Wear protective clothing, not only to mess around the poisonous plant, but also to apply the chemical with. Read the label directions very carefully, and then apply it according to label directions and do a good and a thorough job of applying the chemical. Roundup comes in a variety of formulations and concentrations. You may be able to find a liquid concentrate such as this in which you would mix about 2 ounces per gallon of water. You may also find Roundup in a ready-to-use spray container, which would work very well, and you simply just spray the material on the poison ivy, saturating the plant very good to the point of runoff. You'll probably see results on this in 3 to 4 days as far as control beginning. But in some cases, and particularly if the poison ivy is well established, there may be some regrowth, and so you'd want to come back and treat as quickly as possible when you see regrowth appearing. Poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac are certainly no friend to the gardener. They are a very good plant for some wildlife to feed on, however, and so out in the wild, deer and other wildlife may browse on them, and they really do not seem to be injured. In fact, no types of pets seem to be injured by these toxic plants, but certainly the gardener does.